Okay, nice. We're recording.
Oh, you know what? So what I did is I just split my tablet on the side. It's actually a way better presentation all around. I should have done that a long time ago. What the heck? All right. Well, how was your week? How was your week? How's life in Serbia?
Well, actually, we had a counter meeting organized by the government.
Oh,
Um, it's now a open discussion whether the opposition meeting was bigger or the government meeting was bigger. And
yeah.
honestly, it it, at the end, it really isn't very important because
Mm.
the revolution is over. It's the government has some things that it needs to do, uh, but this has more to do with legal stuff, and I think
Hmm.
they want to do a cleaning up of the internal system.
Yeah, that's a common response to when there's attempt to kick you out of power. Well, we might not want these guys to do that if they don't win. That's the risk you take when you're trying to do these things. Is if you lose, you get kicked out. At the
Yeah,
least.
it's a question of whether the protesters had internal support from various branches of the government and so on
Mm.
and so forth. And it's a lot of people mentioned the prosecutor's office, which is, for instance, contrary to the U.S., it's like semi-independent or whatever. But nevertheless, this is internal stuff, and the major thing is that there won't be any change of government as such.
Yeah.
We
Well,
still have
they didn't win. I could tell that. So pretty much now is the repercussions of what happens when you don't win.
exactly, and uh, Serbia is a small country.
Mm.
We're not exactly surrounded by the friendliest bunch, as you probably know.
Yep.
So history won't end, with this attempt failing.
No.
Other things will happen.
In fact, it's probably going to be a non-event, except for the people that get rolled up by it. You know, the protesters themselves are going to get strung out to dry. But that's also the risk you take when you do these things.
Yeah, it's actually very questionable to which extent there will be repercussions for them. For some
Huh?
people, definitely, of course, but it's. I'm not sure that the repercussions will be broad because there were a lot of protests, so it's not politic to try to get even and so on and so forth. So at least at this side, it's things are somewhat calming down.
Oh
But
boy.
I'm aware that you wanted to bring up the situation in the
Yeah.
U.S.
Well, I'm going to focus on one part of this because I have a feeling it's going to get a heck of a lot uglier real quick, like. But for the moment, the immediate issue, it's the economy, stupid.
It always is.
Yeah, because that's generally what the average person really looks at is their quality of life. And as long as they're convinced that one, either their quality of life is good or it hasn't really changed, they're probably not going to do much about it. Quality of life being, the things you can afford, the food you can eat, the cars you can drive, the house you can buy, stuff like that. And so long as you're kind of keeping okay, you can do all these things. Most people are happy to let the government do whatever they want to do. That's kind of how this thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the color revolution did not succeed here.
Yeah.
Uh, Serbia is not famous for its great economy for
No.
obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I don't I don't think that we're that hardworking, and also we have been basically destroyed. I don't know how many times in the last
Ooh,
100, 200 years.
gonna say you could go all the way back to 1850 if you want, or 18 was what was it? Somewhere around Napoleonic time, 1805. But we're not going to go back that far. You can go back 100 years. It's probably like four destructions just in the last 100 years. Because you got whatever the Germans did, you got whatever the communists did, you got whatever the Serbians did, what the Americans did to them, and so on and so forth. So yeah, kind of hard to keep it consistent.
Up.
All that much destruction there.
Betty, I think you've been broken up. Okay. I think you're better now, but I think your internet has broken up.
No.
Seriously? Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Well, thankfully, what I said wasn't crazy important. I mean, well, it is important because we should be aware of the fact that Serbia has actually had a lot more issues of just flat out destruction than the U.S. has. In fact, the U.S. hasn't really tasted any destruction, which is ironically probably one of our bigger problems is we haven't been wiped out except 1930, but then the whole world got wiped out then, so it wasn't just us. But we didn't have things like actually blow up. We just lost jobs, and big deal, of course. That was the lead-in comment that quality of life is usually the first discriminator anybody has when it comes to how they feel about their government. And the flip side of that, and that's something we've seen here a lot, if you're the outsider party trying to gain power, you always try and convince the people that your quality of life was better when they were in charge than it is now. And that works out really well in the U.S. because we tend not to remember things more than like 3 or 4 years old. So it's really easy to forget how well you were doing or how well you were not doing 4 years ago. And, when you're trying to resume power, it's like, well, you guys were doing a lot better back then. We were in charge, so we need to be back in charge again so things get better. But, that's standard politics there. Nothing fantastic there. However, let's hyper-focus on one thing in particular, and that's the lovely tariffs that the United States announced last week. Gosh, this current crew, it's like you don't even know what they're doing because every day it's some new crisis. So I'm assuming you have tariffs in Serbia. I'd be surprised if you didn't have something.
Well, actually, I'm going to plead ignorance here because yes, we do have tariffs, but we do have also some free trade zones, and yeah, actually, I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert in there. Although I'm a lawyer, this is something that I frankly have not been considering for quite some time. But
I'll tell you why they don't consider it, because they generally don't work. And that's why they don't really have a lot of tariffs throughout the world, because they don't work.
Well,
they could.
Well, they're completely contrary to the idea of globalization.
Absolutely.
So there of course there's a reason why there was a push to lower the tariffs. However, I think that globalization as we know it is probably gone. And
not quite, but the way that as we knew it, yeah, that's pretty much gone, because the United States declared war on that whole thing this last week or so. That was the main fallout from the tariff war. But usually what you would do, and I don't know what your big industries are in Serbia, but let's say for sake of argument, you have a lot of oil workers, for example. Yeah, well, I guess that'd be Romania. Romania has a big oil market, but let's say Serbia has a big oil market. What you would do with your tariff is you would protect your oil business. So somebody's like flooding your market with cheap oil, basically making it not very economical to make oil inside of Serbia. You would put a tariff on that, like, whatever percent you want, 50% for sake of argument. And that would then make the imported oil more expensive than your internal oil, which ideally would have people taking your oil first and then doing exports. And that would preserve your oil industry.
And in particular, people would go after agricultural products first. So this is where typically tariffs would be the highest. I think the EU is the champion in this regard. That they probably
Yeah,
have the highest tariffs there because they want to protect their own
sure
agricultural
do.
industry.
And I get that because, quite frankly, if everything was even keel and we weren't like fighting each other as a country, there's no question Ukrainians could destroy your wheat market because they're always going to make a lot more wheat than you. And it's always going to be a lot cheaper than what you could do. So if you didn't have tariffs, your wheat industry would completely disappear.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, our president has done. Yeah, I'm not going to comment too much on that, but he's trying to save jobs that don't exist because we don't have these manufacturing jobs like he was thinking we had. So if you put a tariff on stuff coming in the country, you're basically saving our manufacturing jobs. Well, we don't actually have these manufacturing jobs, so I'm not really sure what he's saving. Like, okay, well, once your jobs are gone, the tariffs are going to have like no value at all because you can't begin to match the production lost to make up for what's coming in. In fact, that's part of globalization. You set up these production places in places where it's cheaper to do it. So you have a lot of manufacturing in China because you can do cheap manufacturing there. You do it all in agriculture in the United States because we have, massive agricultural setup. I don't, back to the Serbian oil thing. If you guys made a lot of oil, you would do production of oil in Serbia because that's where the cheapest is to get. So putting a tariff on something after the work is already left is like, okay, well, that doesn't really do anything because there's nothing to save here. It's all gone. Now, if you keep this tariff in place for 4 more years, you might actually get to the point where people would turn around and start making jobs in the United States that kind of go underneath that tariff. But more likely, what's going to happen is you just watch how they do all these tariffs, and then you just move your production to whatever the cheap place is that isn't on this tariff list. So, for example, we're going after China. Obviously, that's like the big war, the big tariff war. So, probably what's going to happen is the Chinese are just going to move their manufacturing to India. It'll still be Chinese stuff, but it'll be coming from India. India won't have a tariff on it, so all that stuff is still going to come into the country, but under Indian tariff as opposed to Chinese tariff, and the Indian or the Chinese just walk all around that thing, and nothing really happens.
Well, for what can I say? First of all, of course, I'm not privy to any ideas that your either this or the other administration has because I'm not an insider, like neither are you. So I
Yeah.
can only guess. My guess goes back to NAFTA.
Oh, wow. You're for not knowing anything, you're pretty observant because that's
Well,
actually where all this stuff starts, really.
yeah, you have to follow what happens in the U.S.
Yeah.
Otherwise, obviously the U.S. Well, it's one of the positive things that I think about this new administration is that they don't want to be the only global power, but
They,
they still very much want to be, well, the primary superpower if possible.
we're gonna touch on that here in a little bit because I have a real
No
specific
problem.
point for that, but we're not there yet. I've got to develop the argument a little bit more to get to the point
Yeah.
where that is extremely relevant what you just said, but we'll get to there.
Well, so like in your example, like you said, for instance, if you have manufacturing in China and you have agriculture in the US, uh, you had manufacturing in the American North and you had the agriculture in the American South.
Mm-hmm.
Who won?
Well, if you're talking about Civil War, that would have been the North. In
Yeah,
fact, that's a whole different discussion. We're not going to get to that one like ever.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
a whole topic
yeah,
there.
yeah. But that's the example I was looking for.
Yes.
So you want to have the industry.
Well, so we'll rewind the American thing and tie in the NAFTA here in a second. So what happened is like America was like the top dog by far for 50-ish years, and most of that was because we were the only country in the world that didn't get wrecked by World War II. So for a span of about 30 years, you're just buying American stuff because no one else is even making these things. So back then we had all this manufacturing to make cars, airplanes, steel, coal, oil. We could do all that stuff, and everybody was buying it from us because we were the only game in town at that point. Of course, as the years go on, everyone else kind of gets their stuff going back together, and then you have to kind of like, okay, well, maybe Americans shouldn't do so much steel anymore because the Japanese do steel better, or maybe we shouldn't do so much oil because the Serbians now do oil better. Well, we got used to that like 40-year thing where we were the top dog. All these jobs are here. That's fine. But when you start having all this work going on, eventually your workers want more salary because they want a piece of the pie. You know, that's kind of common sense. If you want people to do your work, you have to pay them to come do your work. As they do more work and things get better, they want more money. That's kind of like a natural thing.
Yeah.
Well, NAFTA.
Mhm.
So what NAFTA did is it basically created this big free trade zone just in North America. So pretty much Canada, United States, and Mexico. So the big wigs looked at this and said, you know what? I'm going to move my high expensive jobs from the United States to Mexico. So we're still going to sell these cars at the same price, but now we have to pay our laborers less because they're doing it from Mexico instead of from the United States. So I don't know what the numbers are. A Mexican guy might work $2,000 a month or something, for example. The American guy's like $10,000 a month. Well, if you're a big business owner, you're going to happily go to Mexico because you know that's just money in your pocket. You still sell the car for $50,000 or whatever, but now instead of paying $10,000 to make it, you only pay $2,000. You make $8,000 more dollars. I quadruple dog assure you, it was the Wall Street executives that forced that administration to make the NAFTA trade deal because it. I guarantee the only people that would do that are the executives and owners because you know the worker bees aren't really going to be aware of that, and then they're going to be really mad when they finally figure out what that actually means.
and
Which is,
and then and then you finally wind up with a problem because you have a lot of people out of work,
yep,
and obviously these people that are out of work are not going to vote for the parties
nope,
that actually took their work, and
yeah,
they're going
no,
to
no,
vote
they're
for
not.
somebody. Yeah, they're going to vote for somebody that promises to do something else.
Yeah, and
So
let me tell you the way American politics work, and this is the trouble we had in 2016 when it was Trump versus Clinton. From the average person's perspective, you can't tell the difference between these two candidates because they're both very pro business. They're both doing things that the business people want you to do. Neither of them really do anything for the people. So it's like, to me, you guys look like you're the same candidate because neither of you are actually bringing back industry. Neither of you are bringing back jobs. You're just kind of doing this thing that the average person doesn't really benefit from. So who the hell we vote for? Well, in that case, you vote for the guy with the louder mouth because you think, oh, he's more energetic and motivated by this, so he's going to do it right by us.
and he's anti-establishment. This is also very important.
Well, that's
He framed
tells
he
himself.
yeah, well, that's how he framed himself. That's
Yeah.
you know that's why he won.
Mm-hmm.
um it's just a question of um I guess you can see it like this. In the 1990s, America was in a great place.
Oh yeah.
Um there were no enemies,
Not,
no
no,
enemies to be even considered as important.
not really. No.
Uh, Everybody was using the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you had total domination everywhere, and probably the idea is we can't do no wrong.
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna be like us, and everybody likes us,
Yeah.
and we can't make a mistake, and so on and so forth.
You can if you
However,
did. Different story.
yeah, well,
That's the theory.
yeah, yeah. 30 years on, it kind of it has been shown that yeah, mistakes were made, and indeed
Oh my gosh, yeah.
American position is not what it used to be.
No,
Now,
actually, it's still okay, but yeah, it's slipping daily now at this point.
yeah,
Oh,
I think I'm gonna be the ugly Serbian right now,
hmm.
and I'm gonna say it's much worse than you think.
Well, I think it's
Yeah,
really bad, but I would agree with you because most people don't look at these things the way I do. I can see that it's not doing too well. Most people are still thinking, we'll be all right. We'll survive this. I don't know.
oh well, you will survive. It's not a question. It's not always a question of a meltdown happening. It's uh, speaking from Serbia because of our perspective. Trust me, you'll survive. It won't be nice,
It will
but
not be fun.
obviously, yeah. Well, obviously, you're not gonna be as bad as Serbia in the '90s. Obviously,
Yeah,
so
uh, maybe not. We'll see. All right, so let's go back to Tariffs 2025 version. So I have my theory about why this is going down. I'm not going to go into a whole lot, but just touch on it a little bit. I have a feeling that our president really loves the idea that he's this great negotiator. So when he comes into town and he sees something that he didn't negotiate, it's like, well, I'm going to wreck all this and renegotiate it because I'm so good at this that whenever I make the renegotiation, it's going to improve anything. Well, from what I've seen, it's almost inevitably the thing that was in place already before, but because he didn't do it, he doesn't get credit for it. So he has to actually do this thing in order for him to get credit for it. He likes getting credit for a lot of stuff. So that's number one. Number two, I think he's got in his head that these tariffs are going to bring work back to the United States, which no, because the work's already gone. In order for you to actually bring work like this back to the United States, these tariffs have to be in place across multiple administrations because it's at least a 3 or 4 year project to start spinning up the factories. So you basically have to hope or assume that the next president is also going to continue these tariffs so that you have like a 6 to 8 year period where these jobs could potentially come back. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm a business guy, I'm not going to want to build a factory. I'm just going to try and figure out some other way to move my goods through the whole network so that I don't get hit with these tariffs. I'm not going to plop down $50 million on a factory. I'm just going to move my stuff. Instead of shipping it straight to the United States from China, I'll ship it to India, and then from India, it'll go to the United States, and I'll dodge a tariff because this thing will look like it came from India. There won't be any factories built.
yeah,
However,
yeah.
it does give our president the opportunity to go back and attempt to negotiate a deal with these people so that he can put his name on something. And then it says,
Yeah,
oh, Trump did that, Trump did that, Trump did that, Trump did that. He did all that. He's such a great negotiator.
yeah, I'm definitely not gonna dispute about his outlook, but because he does look very self-important. Of course,
Hmm.
being a politician, that kind of is a given.
Yeah.
Uh, on the other hand, again, it's that you are in a relatively bad situation,
Now we
and
are.
in a relatively bad situation, well, look, listen, if there was going to be peace in the world, guaranteed, then why not? You can focus on agriculture and finance industry
Yeah.
and legal services and Hollywood and that's it. You can do stuff like that because there's going to be peace and those are
Yeah.
variable services, and at the end of the day, it's okay. However, since this is by no means guaranteed,
Mm-mm.
in particularly, of course, because the U.S. itself is not a very peaceful nation.
No, not at all.
If you plan, or if you envisage, or if you
Good
think
word.
there's going to be a war in some kind of a relatively close future, you need to reindustrialize like tomorrow.
Yeah, because we're not going to be able to build the gear that we could build in World War II. In fact, we don't have the capability to build much of that stuff right now. So ships,
Exactly. Yeah.
not
You
sure we have
have
more than 2 or 3 shipyards, for example.
you have a defense industry which is from what I can see very bloated and very money intensive. Let me put it that
Yeah,
way.
we have way too much money in our defense industry. It's really not a good thing at all. So let me get
Well,
to my big point on the tariffs here real quick before I
uh-huh.
forget what. So I bet you're kind of curious as to why the tariffs kind of like got lifted so quick.
Well, I think the stock market almost crashed.
Yes. So I'll tell you what happened. It's actually kind of funny because I watch this. It's like, oh yeah. So normally in all these good days, if your stocks are like blowing up, people will take the money out of the stock and immediately try and put it into country bonds of some sort. So because that's
Mhm.
usually when your stock market crashes, your bonds go up in value. And the United States has this really wonderful position where until the last couple of months, this was considered like the safest investment in the world that you could ever have was a U.S. government bond. So it's like,
Yeah.
I haven't got to my point yet, but you would, let's put it this way. If you're betting on Russian bonds versus United States bonds, you're almost certainly going to pick United States bonds over Russian bonds, at least in the older days, because you think, well, the United States has a lot of money. They always pay their bills. Their government's good for it. We'll just put our money over here until the stocks figure themselves out and then we'll push it back over the stocks. Well,
Mhm.
what actually happened is as the stock market crashed, the bond prices crashed as well, which we've
Ah,
seen that
okay.
before. So what had happened is that the people that actually know what they're doing, they say, you know what? Americans have had a pretty good free ride in this. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to start selling off our bonds at the same time the stock market's crashing. So then the bond prices will go up, and then the United States will be like, shit, this has never happened before. We haven't had the stock market crash and the bonds crash at the same time. Oh, we better like back up and call out the tariffs so that our bond market doesn't crash too. So the other advantage we have is that we are currently, for now, kind of like the world's currency. So everybody in the whole world has some sort of vested interest in not seeing our bond market crash. When the bonds start going down, it's like, oh, we have a whole different kind of problem here. Maybe we don't want to do those tariffs and crash the stock market and the bond market at the same time. Because the other thing is the United States government is really money hungry and they always run a deficit. When your bonds crash, that also means 2 things. One, people aren't going to loan you so much money.
Exactly. Yeah.
And two, the interest rates on that money is going to go right up. And it's like, oh, great, we crashed our stock market. And to borrow money, we also have to pay a lot more money now. Oh, maybe we don't want to do that.
Yeah. eh, as I mentioned, you are in a world of hurt territory because you
Pretty
want to
much.
do. Yeah, your government wants to do some things. It wants to retain its primary position in the world. Uh, not that ambitious as the previous administration, the neocons and things like that, but still you want to have a military dominant position. You want to be the most prosperous nation in the world, and you want to keep the reserve currency.
Uh, you get to
Yeah, I've
pick.
got some bad, and
It's
you
not
you
going to
want
happen.
to and you want to reindustrialize in case there is a war between you and China, because honestly you lost the war with Russia basically on the industrial level. So uh, I have some bad news and I have some bad news also.
Which bad news did you like? Give me the first one first.
Yeah, this is simply not going to happen altogether. Now,
Uh,
obviously, there is a there is this whole thing about Trump being a glory hound, and I completely understand that where you're coming from. The other thing is that you do need to reindustrialize, firstly, because of any potential war, and secondly, because of the blue-collared workers, which are disaffected. And if, now they voted for Trump, tomorrow they will vote for somebody else who is also a anti-establishment figure. So that's Trump had an idea with the tariffs. It seems that it blew up in his face. I don't think that he will be leaving this idea so soon.
Well,
It's.
I have one theory on that that's going to be slightly contentious.
Mhm.
In fact, I have to be careful now. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's YouTube. You got to be careful.
Yeah, so I think one of the things he did, so he has pretty much got away where people can kind of send him money without getting caught. Although at this point, they're not really investigating these things at all anymore. It's something they used to do. They used to not allow you to directly give money to politicians, and it used to be kind of illegal. Well, it's kind of gone away now because they're not enforcing it. And quite frankly, this current administration isn't going to do any investigation on it at all. So I expect the other thing they're doing here is he's setting it up so that, okay, country X, Serbia, come to me, talk to me. If you give me $100,000 to this particular contribution thing, I'll lower your tariffs to 5%. And imagine if you rinse and repeat this for every country in the world, you're going to have 80 countries in the world giving you $100,000 just to cut the tariffs back to what they were before. So you're going to walk away with like $800,000 and nothing's really changed, which is really good for Trump. Doesn't really do much for anybody else, though.
I'm not sure about that. Not completely. I'm not completely bought on the idea. Partially, maybe, because I think that Trump allies will have an easier time making deals in other countries. So there might be this factor working in. I think that given that he was, well, he got himself in a situation to be shot at. I think he has bigger fish to fry. I ultimately dealing with the destruction of the Democratic Party, but that's a discussion for another time.
No, I haven't done this for favors, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and in terms of the economy, I don't know what to say. You have a great thing in having the dollar as the reserve currency. However, I think the Russian sanctions have well, not perhaps destroyed the dollar, but went a long way towards doing this, because after the Russian sanctions, nobody is going to believe in keeping their money in the U.S. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, I would expect at this point I would be moving my money out of the U.S. As fast as I could possibly pull it off.
Yeah, so you have a lot of problems that you need to solve. It's not like you're gonna go hungry or whatever, however it happens. But for instance, if you lose the dollar as the reserve currency, that's going to have a very big effect on your quality of life.
Oh, yeah, it'll degrade it a lot. It'll take a while for people to figure it out because it's not really going to affect the rich people much. They're still going to be able to do what they want to do. But the average person, pretty much what's going to happen is all your stuff is just going to be a lot more expensive. In fact, I'm assuming it's more expensive now already. So all these shenanigans, all they do is just increase the price on the little guy. And yeah, now you have more disaffected people. And
and
at some point, these two things collide: the quality of life and resistance to your government. I don't know when this thing actually pops, but people are getting a little crankier than they usually do in the United States. You don't normally see these sorts of unrest things that you've seen lately. That's kind of a different look for us. And yeah,
yeah, well, I've seen unrest here in Serbia, and the quality of life was improving. So, you
oh,
never know. But
huh.
again, I think that the whole game with the tariffs is the idea to somehow re-industrialize the U.S., but it's not going to be easy. Simply put, because you already gave the reasons.
Yeah.
People want to produce things on the cheap, and if China is too expensive, they'll move to India or Indonesia or
Wherever, yeah, Vietnam,
whatever. Yeah,
Africa, pick a spot.
yeah, whatever. It's just a question of you know it's the question of squaring the circle, because
Hmm.
on the other hand you have,
Squaring the circle? Squaring the circle. Oh.
yeah, well, because honestly you have very much different interests, because you have the
Hmm.
interest of your great capital, and the capital owners who want to have things produced on the cheap. And the other side, you have the interest of the common people, which want to have jobs, and that's that's kind of a, you somehow need to find a middle ground. I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's going to be
Ooh.
easy. uh
No,
you know
because usually once a factory leaves, it's really hard to get said factory back again because the infrastructure that supported the factory is not going to be there anymore. So you got to do all sorts of work to kind of bring it back. And that's what's actually kind of funny between the way that the previous president approached it and the way this president approaches it. I actually think the previous president had a better plan for that, but we'll never see it now because the current president spends all his energy just saying the previous president doesn't know what he's talking about. So you don't even really get to look at his plan and see what was good and what isn't good. You just reject everything that he did because Trump didn't do it. It's like, well, they might have had some good ideas there. We'll never know because you're not going to look at it. So you could either do what he did and try to invest in the infrastructure and bring it up from that point, or you could do what this current guy is and just slap a tariff on there and hopefully the business figures out, oh, so if this tariff is in place for 8 years, I guess I better start building factories in the United States. Good
well
luck with
well
that.
yeah, well, two things on that. First of all, I don't think that you have money to invest. That's kind of a problem. The other
Uh,
thing is, yeah, the other thing is, I think Trump is very much, 1990s thinking. He's very much, I think, a old school protectionist.
oh, you're
You
talking
know,
1920s thinking, not 1990s. You're talking about
Well,
20s.
there was a tariff when the Republicans came into power in the 1860s or 1770s. I don't know. Anyways,
How we
he's
funded our government was by tariffs until they did the income tax somewhere before the Civil War. That's how they
yeah,
funded.
yeah. That's that might be his reasoning. Looking into, okay, that's how we made our industry great. So let's harken back to
Uh,
that. Whether
so
that
you
will work,
skip over the whole 50-year period from 1950 to 1990 or 40-year period. I don't do math very well. You skip over that whole part where it was working and you focus on the part where it wasn't working. Okay, that's kind of weird.
yeah, it's in terms of the U.S. economy, I don't think that you're in Humpty Dumpty zone.
No, I
Okay,
would
I
agree.
think I think that you have very good basics on which you can restructure your economy.
Yeah.
Uh it's a question whether Russia, China, and yeah, Iran or whatever the other country is, do
I
they
think it's
see you? Do they really see you as a mortal enemy by now, or if they see you as, one of the powers?
I
In
don't
the
know.
first case, of course, they're going to work everything to sabotage your recovery.
Yeah,
In the second case, they would have an interest to, at least not work against you.
yeah.
I'm afraid that the first case is probably more realistic by now.
Well, that would be my
So
guess, only because of
yes,
the nature of geopolitics, anyways, which is kind of the weird position the United States used to be in. They used to try and negotiate treaties as a form of strength. So they would actually intertwine all these countries, and it's like, okay, you guys won't go to war because if you go to war, you're going to throw all these things that we set up for you out the window. And for Europe's case, they haven't had a major fight in Europe, with the exception of Yugoslavia, of course. And what, like 50 years, I guess? They haven't really had a major blowout since World War II, except for Yugoslavia, of course. There's been very little real fighting in Europe. And before that, they were fighting every couple of years. So it worked as far as uh, keeping war off the table for the most part. So the only people really fighting were people that were outside of all these connections that the United States had set up. Well, those connections are gone, so I don't know what's going to happen now. Maybe we'll have more wars. I don't know.
well, again, this is again a topic for a new discussion, and
Yes.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
It's just I have at this point I have no idea whatsoever. And of course, but again, if there is any kind of plan for a new war, in that case, you must reindustrialize
Yeah.
immediately, and but you're back to square one.
Yeah.
If you try to reindustrialize via benefits given to factories, you don't have the money. And if you want to reindustrialize via tariffs, uh, well, it's seemingly not working. So,
Well, I have.
peace might break out. Who knows?
Well, I'll tell you another thing we did that was actually kind of funny. So we changed our tax code immensely over the last 50 years, and it used to be that when you tax companies, you would get a write-off for things that you did on behalf of your workers. So like you would have some incentive to like, okay, well, I have all this money, I'm going to get taxed all this money. I should go build a factory because that means my tax will go down, and then maybe I could produce more later on. So it's kind of like a win-win for everybody. Well, they completely disconnected that from, the capitalists. They don't get tax breaks for that sort of stuff. Now their tax breaks come in some sort of weird thing that if you, oh, I guess it's, what do you call it? You get taxed less for stock price fluctuations than you do for like actually putting money into your pocket. So now they have incentive to like not really manufacture much, but buy more stocks. So you can kind of get taxed at a less rate for stocks. In fact, that's what happens with our CEOs. It's not so much that they get a big salary. They might get $1 million a year, but then they
Mhm.
get $20 million in stocks, and the stock prices are taxed way less than what you would normally be taxed. So now the capitalists have incentive to do more financial manipulations than doing any sort of like real production of goods. They should probably change our tax structure so it supports that again. But yeah, we're not going to do that. Ah,
You, it's you have to do something, and
yes.
definitely. Uh, but what's ultimately going to be successful, I have no idea at this point.
I don't know
And
either.
I don't think, I'm going to say that probably nobody does,
Mm-mm.
because states and human society are so complex, actually, that
Mm-hmm.
thinking that you're gonna push a button and get a result,
Mm-mm.
it never seemingly works that way. But
No. Not at all. Because humans are kind of weird to begin with, and then you have
Yeah.
politics, which is kind of weird. Then you add economics on top of politics, on top of humans. It's like, oh, we got three really wildly uncontrollable things going on here all at once, and we have no idea how these three are going to come together, if they even will come together at some point or not. All I know
Yeah,
is
it's
the lives or dies on economics, so you kind of have to get that one right before anything else happens.
yeah, yeah,
Because you
yeah.
screw that up, everything else just falls apart.
True, true. So
So I think we should talk about this defense thing next time. That's going to be an interesting conversation. If you thought Europe was safer in the last 50 years or not. Seems like that kind of got you riled up there a little bit.
well, listen, we already lived through the bad stuff,
Yeah, you did.
so
Man, you got like two scoopings there because you got the 40s survey, which is a freaking mess, and then you got the 90s survey, which is another mess. It's like, no wonder everybody's all cranky.
and we all got already, also we got the 1910s.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah. Someday I want to really research that period because that is extremely fascinating. 1910 to 1920 Balkans area is just like all sorts of craziness going on.
Listen, listen. You can propose the subject for next discussion. I think that we successfully concluded today that we have no idea whatsoever how to solve the problems. But
No,
yeah,
not that I'm
well,
surprised.
at least the first part is that you have a problem. I think
Yes.
the realization is there that something needs to be fixed. But how exactly to go about it?
Got me, brother. I have no idea. But I hope they figure it out in it before something really dumb happens. And they
Yeah,
like crash it or something. Everything crashes down.
yeah. I don't think you've gone that far, but
No, not
definitely,
quite.
definitely, it's gonna be a bumpy ride ahead.
Yes.
But people are extremely resilient, and that's
Yeah.
what living in Serbia teaches you.
Yeah. They really are.
So
Really, I was just talking to one of my friends today about that. Like Egyptians, for example, they have a really hard time in general, as you can imagine. Their government doesn't really do them many favors, but yet they're still, or actually Filipinos too, man. They're still like the happiest people on earth, even though they have such miserable quality of life things going on. But they just kind of, I don't know, they put it into focus and they kind of get on with the business of having their lives, and I can respect that actually. So people
yes,
are pretty tough. It's just, I think where the Americans have a problem is they don't realize in most of the rest of the world, life is pretty tough. We didn't really quite realize how good we had it. Now we kind of get a taste of what it's like when life isn't so good. Oh, you don't really like it. It's like, well, shoot, man, this is still better than like 80% of the world lives. You guys just haven't seen crap.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
used to seeing a turd sandwich. You've never seen one before. Whereas, they have turd sandwiches for breakfast.
Uh,
Anyway, well, I'm kidding.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Before I think we're gonna finish up the discussion before we get
Yeah,
banned. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Let's just say we
Barry,
haven't
it's
really had it super tough here. We don't really understand what it means to have tough times, and now you're going to start having tough times. So that's kind of how it goes. Anyway, we should leave it at that. You should probably choose the next subject since I usurped this one.
okay. Okay, deal. It,
Yeah,
it was great talking to you,
yeah,
and all the best
yeah.
from Belgrade.
Belgrade to Baltimore. That's what we're doing today.
Oh,
In Baltimore today. All right, I'll let you go, my friend. I know it's late there. A pleasure as always. We will talk soon.
bye bye, Barry.
Bye.